focused on preparing for the forum and is 3 months away. Omar still refuses to come, but 1 year we'll get him to come. He loves his Monday mornings, but don't get me anywhere near Fujairah. What's happened this weekend? Not much would be the answer because the oil markets clearly think it's just another day at the wilderness. Brent crude oil up 1.5%, 78.19. And WTI back a few bits, $2 basically at $75, or that's $3 rather than two. So its spread is widened again. One would have to say, given the scale of the events over the weekend, that this is a fairly tepid market response. Let's kick off, as always, on Monday morning with Omar Najia, derivatives trader at BB Energy. Omar, we know what happened yesterday. What's going to happen tomorrow?
Well, I mean, it's extremely interesting. Now, if I mean, now you not only have to think about the market, but you've got to become like a geopolitical analyst, right? So if I was Iran, then it doesn't make sense to kind of, drag the US into the fight and hit them and all this kind of stuff. Close Hormuz, I think, is a nice card to have, but I think you keep it in your back pocket and you basically hit Israel more and more. And that does two things. If you keep hitting Israel and not the rest of the stuff, then when America gets involved again, it makes it very difficult for Trump. It just increases the pressure on him massively because the only reason he has to get involved is that he wants to save his pal, but nothing to do with US troops, nothing to do with economy, nothing to do with anything. So I think that's what they're going to do. Netanyahu said this morning that we're very nearly done with all our stuff. The Iranian foreign minister is going to Moscow, I think. So I think let's see what happens. But I think apart from all this, once the dust settles, the downside for oil prices is finished. I think for a very long while to come. So the reasons are, the inflation in the market, geopolitical risk. Everybody's had like a severe wake-up call. If you look at oil in terms of real prices, where it is today compared to 10, 20, 15, whatever it is years ago, compared to any other asset, it's extremely, extremely cheap. Price it in gold, price it in Bitcoin, price it in Apple, price it in whatever you want, it's extremely cheap. So I think this is telling me that, from that 130 high we had during the Ukraine war, we went down from that 130, 35, whatever it was, 32, all the way down to 55, 12. And I think that's a low. And basically, I think that we're heading now over time in the other direction and we take out those highs. So I think that 55 low, we're not going to revisit for a very, very long time. So that's the view.
Robin Mills, CEO of Kamar Energy. Robin, are we, what stage of the war do you think this is at? The events over the weekend, is that the sort of punctuation at the end of the beginning, or is this the beginning of the end? Your sense of what's the context of this US development? It does seem the mood music of them coming out of the weekend, if indeed it's not full of smokes and mirrors and deception, that is all down talk. Netanyahu is kind of like, yeah, they were kind of got near the end of what we're looking at, or there's been a lot of smokes and mirrors on this thing. But what are your thoughts on where we're at? Beginning of the end of the beginning?
I think very much end of the beginning, Sean. I mean, look, the US strikes have taken place, but and the strikes against Fordo mostly, but we haven't seen, as far as we can tell, the real heavy armaments being used against Natanz and Esfahan, and it's the Esfahan facility. That's a new one, much deeper buried. And where has the Iranian nuclear material gone? There's also this question of, the Iranians knew about this in advance and likely have moved stuff out. So, and I think also when we say, beginning for who, is this the beginning between the beginning for the Iranians or the Israelis or the US? Because I think you can imagine from the US side, this is kind of one and done, and yeah, we've dropped our big bombs and mission accomplished and go home. But for the Israelis, eliminating the Iranian nuclear program completely and stopping it from being reconstituted, we're nowhere near that.
Let's go to America this morning, and it's still obviously the evening. Brian Pieri, founder of Energy Rogue. Brian, looking at this from, I mean, I know I just qualified. None of us really are deep energy or geopolitical analysts here, but obviously we can read a lot of tea leaves. What's the sound music like in the US? This does seem to be some like some sort of triumphant sort of the big sort of royal we the in America always rally behind the flag, rally behind the troops, all that kind of stuff. Your thoughts on this from the point of view of America? Is America behind this? Give him Trump? Does Trump has endless oxygen to prosecute a deeper engagement in this war?
No, that's a great question, Sean. And listen, thank you for having me on here. And I just wanted to say thank you for always bringing international voices to this every single day because it brings so many different perspectives. And all these different perspectives are super important. And as Omar said, and as we've talked about before, we are all energy analysts, but we've had to become geopolitical analysts. But a couple of things as far as is America behind this? Is America obviously, if you listen to a speech, you're going to get one view of it. But there's already questions on whether or not this was in violation of the Constitution. There are some loyalist right-wing pundits and politicians that are questioning whether or not Congress should have been consulted on this. And it is a gray area when it comes to the Constitution in the United States because the president is in charge of military operations. However, any declaration of war or any strike that could be interpreted that way has to get congressional approval. So it's in a gray area. But then you go into international law, and Iran is basically saying this is in violation of UN international law, and they have a point. So when you look at the cracks beneath the surface, there are a lot of people in the United States, myself included, that I think this is a miscalculation. And something that gets overshadowed is on June 14th. On June 14th, there was a big military parade in Washington, and it ended up being a bust. But on that same day, there were protests in the United States, and it was one of the largest single day protests in the United States. It was called No Kings protest, and it was one of the largest. So if you listen to a particular news channel or news cycle, you're going to be in an echo chamber. And so you have to look at both sides of that. I would say that there's a large portion of America that thinks that this is aggression, and there are a lot of sound bites that are very similar to 22 years ago. I think, Sean, you had a post out there, and you could almost put those clips side by side or overlap them, and it sounds exactly the same. And the fact of the matter is that 22 years ago there was no weapons of mass destruction, and you're hearing a lot of the same rhetoric. So I think a lot of people in America have a little bit more of a cynical eye when it comes to that. 22 years ago there was probably a little bit more blind faith, but a lot of that faith has been eroded. So from a geopolitical assessment, I think that there's a lot of cracks in it. Now, whether or not there's going to be enough momentum to overcome or change things as far as a course of action, I don't know. And then that's a difficult question to answer.
Omar, how do you trade this? I mean, it's been up till now a kind of a one-way street in the sense that since the announcement by the U.S. government that they were withdrawing non-essential staff from the region, which was Wednesday, whatever, a week or so ago, but essentially about 10 days ago. And since then, we've had that sort of progressive upward, slightly incremental, but a big jump, but ultimately incremental rise. And now even with the announcement over the weekend of whatever dropping the biggest bombs the Americans have ever done so, or something like that. The biggest sort of armada of the biggest bombs going around the world and dropping into Iran this weekend. And yet the oil price has, 1.5% has barely shifted. This is a fairly sedate market. How do you trade this now? You say there's no short on this?
No. I mean, unless you want a hole in the head, absolutely no short on this. So if you remember, I've been
Well, that's
saying
a big
for
question. That's why my question today, end of the beginning or beginning of the end, this geopolitical premium balloon could deflate pretty fast, $10 on a white flag being waved.
well, I mean, it really all depends. I mean, yes, you could have like a surprise announcement. Netanyahu flies to Iran and hugs the Ayatollah and all this kind of stuff. But everything is possible. So yes, we could drop
Well,
ten
let's do with
dollars.
what we know rather than what's possible. The biggest bombs of the world dropped in Iran this weekend by the biggest world power. Oil
Not
prices
true.
barely moved.
Not true. Not true. So if you go on, see,
Which
I mean,
part?
it's like the biggest bombs in the world dropped on Iran, right? So a lot of people in the
Okay, let's not
market.
get semantic about it. The US joined the war, big bombs fell, oil price barely moved.
Well, again, I mean, yeah, that's the rationale. If you read, the Wall Street Journal, all this kind of stuff. Some people are saying that the US warned Iran and the Iranians moved everything else, and they didn't hit them with, gigantic bombs and B-2s and obliterating any of that. But they did no damage and they hit them with tomahawks, which basically are £1,000 instead of £30,000. That they said after the strikes, which I didn't believe. I walk in today, and instead of seeing the market up $10, I see it up $1.50. So what's that telling you? I think basically there are some
Well,
very
it's telling you
smart
what the
people.
oil market has told us for the last 2 years. Unless there's direct oil supply infrastructure hit, this market doesn't want to budge. It's
Okay,
pretty consistent.
so let me just make a point, right? 2 weeks ago, we were trading at $65. I was on this show and everybody was saying that nothing is going to happen and everything is whatever and unless and whatever. We're now trading $10 higher, right? Because the market is complacent. I'm telling you, in terms of this market, if you want to basically, I mean, the idea about making money in this market is not to have the biggest set of cojones and go basically plant a flag and say, "Oh, I'm gonna sell it because it's going down and it doesn't react and whatever." No. You want to weed, but you want to be a weasel. You want to wait for somebody else to go do that, get massacred, then come in and pick up the pieces. So in the real world, nobody's going to plant the flag either downwards or upwards. The other thing that I've been saying for a long time now is WTI has a 2 year plus trend line that comes in at $76. You close over that, we've been up and down and through it and back up and whatever. You close over that for one day, and this market, without Iran, is going to absolutely fly. I am biased to the long side, not the short side.
Robin, you've watched Iran for a very long time. You know it well. Navigating this regime, the 45 years, 46 years of the Iranian Islamic Revolution has been incredibly resilient to multiple forces and navigated with sort of great skill, one would have to say, some serious moments. How does this rank? How do you think they navigate this? Is there an exit for them? Your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, look, this is the most dangerous moment for the regime, I would say, since the Iran-Iraq War. Um, but as you say, a resilient regime, and can you give any example of a regime in history that was brought down by strategic bombing alone? It doesn't happen. Saddam survived a decade of isolation and sanctions and bombing, and he was just one man. I think again, we look at the Iranian regime. Okay, you can look at Khamenei, and he's a man of 86, had cancer and so on, and on his way out one way or another, eventually anyway. And you had Trump suggesting that they could have killed Khamenei at some point, either the US or the Iranians, in the past few days. They probably could have done, but there will be somebody else to replace him, and probably somebody smarter and tougher and younger and more effective. So that this regime is not an easy one to remove.
On
And of
that
course,
point, Robin, clearly the supreme leader Ayatollah Khamenei is a very elderly gentleman, a person. He's 87 years of age. He's regardless of all of this, he's very near the end, and there's a lot of forecasts that he's very close. And some years it seems he's not so close. But ultimately, like everybody at 87, you're going to be pretty close to the exit. Do they have a, is there a structure? Is there a natural inherent successor here that even if they did, and we've seen they've obviously the Israelis killed a number of political or military leaders. They've obviously brought in new ones, etc. The succession for the supreme ruler doesn't seem to be that clear, even with all this other stuff aside. Is it?
no, it's not. And look, that's kind of deliberate. But Khamenei himself, he has recently convened the Guardians Council, which will make a decision on the next leader. His son has been out there. It's maybe less likely, but his son has been out there as a possible candidate. But I think what's quite likely in this situation is, maybe there is no new supreme leader, or there's a figurehead, but real power is then taken over by a committee, and then that's more effective. But also a bunch of guys who, if you kill one of them, then that doesn't matter so much. I think that's kind of more likely outcome, and a more military oriented, rather than purely religious leadership.
In terms of the situation, just coming back, Brian, to the US, this appears to be, at least the thesis I'm exploring, is that Trump's Iran dilemma is sacrificing the isolationist MAGA movement that has been his sort of magic carpet to power over the last 10 years for the neocons' interventionist war agenda. This is something that he has at least articulated a dislike of, and has criticized heavily, these never-ending wars. Your thoughts on that, the sacrifice of the isolationist MAGA movement for the neocons, and that would indeed, if he proceeds further with that and there's no reverse gear, would be bullish for oil. Isolationist MAGA movement, more bearish, neocon interventionist war agenda, more bullish. Your thoughts of those two things and the path that he has now taken?
I think what's difficult, that's actually a great question, but I think what's difficult to calculate is what to believe. And you can come up with that based upon articles you read or news outlets that you see, but as well as out of President Trump's mouth. On June 20th, we're going to take a 2-week pause. On June 21st, bombs in Iran. So the fact is, what do you believe? And if you go back and actually listen to the MAGA campaign trail, there was a lot of rhetoric on bombing Iran. And so with that rhetoric combined with a disjointed at the simultaneous time, I am a peace president. I don't want any wars. We don't need to have our military other places. So it is kind of a combination of sound bites, and those combinations of sound bites make it very difficult to figure out exactly what the path forward is. One of the deeper concerns that when you pull back and take a look at the isolationist and you look at the international policy, as we referenced before, a lot of this with Iraq and Iran sounds very familiar. And as far as some of the skepticism from Americans, one of the skepticisms is, well, we don't want Iran to have a nuclear weapon. Well, that's been a soundbite. They're 6 months away from a nuclear weapon. We've been hearing that soundbite since 1992. So it's been repeated over and over and over again. And there's a lot of intelligence, and even from our own intelligence agency that came out in March and said there is nothing to this. There is no plans. There is not this. So in that lens, if that is accurate, then you look at this as a pure act of aggression in terms of supporting Israel. And then my concern as an American citizen and my concern as American livelihood is going to be, is Trump playing checkers while everybody else is playing chess? So that's what I get a little concerned about, and quite frankly, I don't know the answer to that question yet.
Let's go to the survey question to get at least some answer in this room. What stage is Israel's war on Iran now at? What stage is Israel's war on Iran now at? Is it end of the beginning, as I think that's what Robin said? Is it the beginning of the end? And is it number three? The answer to either of those is in Iran's hand. Iran's next step will decide whether it's the end of the beginning or the beginning of the end. Three choices there. Could have added a fourth, but I just wanted to sort of see where things are at. But Omar, looking forward here on terms of the technical side of this market, the ahead of the weekend, where was the technical positioning? Where do you think it goes from the point of view of triggers for more elevated prices, if you like? We still haven't reached the January high of the Brent price or the WTI for that matter. So are we going to test that? What's the structure tell us going forward in this immediate window? End of the
Yeah.
second quarter now this week, third quarter starting next week. We're trading into August, September now.
So let's look at that, right? So there was a high on WTI, let's call it $80 at the beginning of the year, right? We've had all this geopolitical risk. We have basically higher everything else, whatever asset you want to name, everything's higher. Gold, copper, wheat, anything that you mention is higher, right? So what do? You want to basically sell oil at this level, 70, whatever it is, $77, $78, right? Do you want to sell it or do you want to buy it? Knowing that in January, there was nothing going on, we're trading at 80, and now everything's going on, everything is higher. There is literally nothing that is lower, except the dollar, very interestingly enough. So the dollar's lower, every other asset in the world, bar none, is lower than the price of oil. So what do? I say buy. And if you remember, we talked before about there being a deal between basically the Trump administration and OPEC Plus to raise production. And everybody was like, no, 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 no. And then they raised production. And we were thinking like maybe basically they want to flood the market in order to make, let's say, a war somewhere easier, right? So that's why we like to look at things other than basically, narrative that is seen and read by everybody. Because if you do that, you have no edge. You have no different thinking than everybody else. And basically you do exactly the same thing as everybody else and you won't make money. So that's why we like to have an edge by looking at things, people saying, oh, that's ridiculous and we're not going to do that and all that kind of stuff, because it gives us an edge. So
that's ridiculous. We're not going to do that. That's red. I'm going to use a bit of a little badge, little bunting. That's ridiculous. Robin, what's ridiculous about the outlook and the choice that OPEC Plus has to make in the coming days? They're obviously they have their big international seminar coming up in 2 weeks or so in Vienna. Ahead of that, they have to make a decision about the outlook for oil supply in the August. Your thoughts on how all of this plays into that decision making and what they're likely to decide?
Well, the last 3 months of increased production didn't look like such a bad call. Now it's put a bit of oil back in inventories, which might be useful. And I think, next move would be another increase of the same level. Prices are higher, want to capitalize on that. Bit of precautionary, again, build some more inventories. And if they do a smaller cut, it won't be very welcome from the US. Sorry, a smaller increase, it won't be welcome to the US. If they do a bigger increase, it'll look hostile to Iran, and try to undermine Iran. So I think another increase of the same level, the 411,000 barrels, something like that, looks like a
What do
sensible
you
option.
what's your take on the idea that the quota increases of the last few months, first month was a 1 month sort of increase, and then we've had 3 months, or 2 months rather, of accelerated announcements. But yet it seems that data coming through is telling us that actually only maybe a third to a half of that is actually real net new barrels.
Yeah, that's right, and that's kind of advantageous in a way, right? OPEC kind of regains its notional production levels, but also doesn't actually put that much oil back on the market. Part of that is the compensation cuts, that some of the overproducers are supposed to make. Part of that is Iraq in particular complying better, and of course, the more you raise Iraq's ceiling, then the better it can comply. And as they keep going, of course, other members will start hitting their limits as well. So that's I think that's another good reason for me to keep on with these larger increases.
Let's bring in Brian for the last word and get the survey result up, at least from this room. Iran, next step will decide. Brian, where is U.S. oil production going in the second half of this year? Obviously, there was a lot of talk over the last month or so that the sort of second quarter prices, as well as other reasons, was starting to see U.S. oil production plateau at best, maybe decline. Does this change the narrative? A higher price trend line now, whatever the reason we're getting it. What's the outlook for U.S. oil production the second half of this year?
Yeah, and listen, I did want to piggyback on something Omar said. When we look at the risk reward of oil price, there is some risk to the downside, but a significant reward to the upside. So from a long perspective, as a trader, when you're aligning the risk reward, it seems to be in that favor. From a U.S. production profile, rigs have continued to drop for the first 6 months out of the year. And there's a delayed effect on what that means to oil production. And just for reference, we produce in the United States roughly 13.4 million barrels a day. Every month
Sorry,
we
how many?
decline 13.4.
I thought you said 34. I was like,
No, no,
holy
no.
cow.
No, not that quite.
13.4, yeah.
Yeah, so 13.4, but every month we decline because of the vintage of a shale well. We decline by 600,000 barrels. So that means if no new wells came online, we would decline by 600,000 barrels. That means that we have to bring online new production in excess of 600,000 barrels a day, which is a large economic engine. And the rigs have been flatlined for over a year, and basically the number of rigs is equaling that output plus or minus 50,000 barrels. So what that means is to grow by 50,000 barrels, that means 650,000 barrels a day of new production needs to come on this month to grow just by 50,000 barrels a day. And that economic engine is slowing. So, long story short, or long story longer, I guess, I see the U.S. production in decline for the remainder of the year. Even if we're at this $70 level, I'd probably reassess between 80 to 90.
Yeah, that's interesting. And we've got U.S. oil production at best plateau, if not decline. We have OPEC plus increasing quotas, maybe some net barrel gains. And then the Iranian exports, you would imagine, will be disrupted at least for a period, if not perhaps more. So a tighter market than maybe was originally expected in the second half. Another reason why the shorting of this market, as Omar has indicated, would be a fool's gold, and all things together. Although that was generally the narrative only a few minutes ago that our surveys were indicating second half price weakness, and if not downright collapse, nearly 50 and less was a lot of the talk. As they say, a week is a long time in politics, and I think we're very much in politics at the moment rather than anything else, although everything else is still present. But the politics is the big one. The beginning of the end or the end of the beginning, that will determine a lot of the outcome for the direction of oil prices in this third quarter. Robin Mills, thank you so much as always. No better man at it in the Middle East than Robin. Omar Najia, keep making money. Brian Pieri, thank you so much. Go to bed now in Denver, you lucky fella. You'll wake up and see those beautiful mountains. They'll still be there. I'm not sure about ours, but they'll be there. We know that.
Come on over.
All the best. Have a great week, everybody. Take care.
Thank you. Have a good
Thanks,
one.
everyone.